Hello everyone, Merry Christmas. I'm Bitter, and I'm here to review 4 episodes of Thomas and Friends as part of the first season. Episodes 13 through 17 are on the table today. If you want to see all the episodes before this one reviewed, you can check them out on my channel, where I have reviewed them in individual videos. Just thought I might do something special here today. I'll be keeping these short, and I'm sorry for sounding sick and tired. I am both, and it's not 4 a.m. yet, but I wanted to record this before I went to work. Let's just jump into it. Episode 13, Thomas, Terrence, and the Snow. It was autumn on the island, and a tractor was working one of the fields along Thomas's branch line. His name is Terrence, and Thomas can't help but insult him, of course. But Terrence doesn't seem to be bothered. When winter came, Thomas's driver was worried about the snow, but Thomas thought snow was just silly, soft stuff. He hated wearing his snowplow and bounced around enough to break it. The crew couldn't fix it, and Thomas was very happy with himself. Despite everyone else's concerns, he truly believed they were wrong. Snow can't stop me, but it did. He rammed a snowbank and got totally stuck. A bus came to get his passengers, and Terrence, the tractor from earlier, came to pull him free. First, he pulled Annie and Clarabelle away, then came back to get Thomas. Thomas thanked him and complimented his tracks. Alright, review time. There's new music here. Thomas's theme was modified to make it more wintry, and Terrence's theme made one of its few appearances in the show. I find both of these themes to be really good. Not much else to say about them. Visuals here are awesome. This is our first winter episode in the series, and they started off strong. I don't know what they used for this, but it really looks like snow. The opening shot is new. Pretty in its own right, but the winter weather is so interesting and different that it takes away all the attention from it. Thomas running into the snowbank was really well done. I'm sure it took more than one take, and the variety of angles in such a short time worked well to cover up what might have been imperfections. I don't know though, because it happened really fast. I think that was the idea. I tried to see if Thomas had derailed in the top-down angle, but I think to catch it for sure, you'd need to go frame by frame, and I just didn't want to do that. Thomas got humbled and handled it gracefully. Terrence was really cool about it. You know, we saw some of the worst and some of the best of Thomas's character, at least up until this point in the series. He's still prickly, but he does mean well. Overall, very well done. The story feels very rushed though, as if it were meant to be on a stricter timeline than in the Railway series. Everything just happens so fast. This episode would have benefited from a longer runtime. 7 out of 10. Things happen far too fast, but the visuals, the music, and the crash were all excellent, so I can't say it was bad. Episode 14, Thomas and Birdie. We start this episode with Thomas waiting at a signal by a bus depot. He started talking with a bus named Birdie, the same bus that had collected his passengers in the last episode. He came to Thomas's branch line to help take passengers. Right away, the competition starts. They're both sure that they're better than the other. They decide to race. Their drivers agree, and the station master gives them the countdown. Thomas, being a locomotive, has to start off slow. Annie and Clarabelle are worried that Thomas will lose, but Thomas knows that he'll make up ground at the level crossing. The road and railway separate, and then Thomas comes to a station. They start off as fast as they can, but Birdie is already ahead of them. Thomas's crew and coaches are feeling confident, but when they make it to the next station, Birdie is already there. He taunts Thomas and takes off just after Thomas had stopped. Thomas fills up on water and leaves the station feeling better. As they crossed the bridge over the river, they passed Birdie. Thomas had reached full speed now and ran fast into the tunnel, leaving Birdie to climb the hill far behind. Thomas knew for sure that he's won. Not much later, Birdie arrives, and the passengers all celebrated. Birdie complimented Thomas on a race well done, and they work together now. They don't race anymore, because they'd both get in trouble, but they'd very much like to. Review time. There's a new song here for the big race, another piece that covers most of the episode's runtime. It's super good. There's a couple of new locations too, but nothing super exciting. The road bridge running alongside the rail bridge was super cool to me. As for the story, there isn't really much of one, and that's okay. This is simply Thomas's pride and competitive spirit making him a friend somehow. It's not mentioned anywhere that he was being cocky until after his win. It is said, though, that both he and his new friend would like to race again. To me, it says that they started out being a bit full of themselves, but eventually grew into just enjoying the competition and having fun. It's not some sappy performative thing like you get in the early CGI years, or really the model years too. This is a more natural friendship, growing out of competition. This sort of thing happens in real life. It feels right, and Birdie compliments Thomas's personality in such a way that there's some story potential in the future here. They're friends, but also competitors. I'm going to give it another 7 out of 10. A simple, comfortable story, though lacking something perhaps. Season 1, Episode 15, Tenders and Turntables, and Season 1, Episode 16, Trouble in the Sheds. Henry and Gordon felt lonely when Thomas left the yard to run his branch line. They missed him very much. On top of that, they had more work to do, and had to fetch their own coaches. James was feeling the pressure too, and the engine's complaints were causing trouble for the Fat Controller. There's turntables at either end of the main line, so the tender engines can get turned around. It's dangerous for them to run fast backwards, so these are essential pieces of infrastructure. Tank engines like Thomas can run backwards just as well as forwards, but to hear Gordon talk, you'd think the Fat Controller gave him a tender just to show how important he is. He spoke to Thomas about how undignified all the work Thomas does is, but Thomas didn't care. He likes where he's at. Later, there was high winds and Gordon was in a bad mood. He couldn't seem to stop on the turntable in the right place. His crew gave up and made him take his express running backwards. This gave Thomas the perfect opportunity to make fun of him, telling him to scrap his tender and get some tanks in a bunker. James laughs as he passed. Gordon warned him to be careful, but well.
No fear, chuckled James. I'm not so fat as you.
He regretted that comment almost immediately, of course. He didn't stick on the turntable, in fact. He perfectly balanced it. The wind made him spin out of control. Gordon couldn't help but laugh, but James rolled into the sheds with his face turning green. That night, they hold an indignation meeting. They decide these conditions are unacceptable and it's time to go on strike. This leads into the next episode, where I'm going to count as part 2. I do consider this a two-parter. I'm not sure how everyone else feels about that. So the next day, the Fat Controller sat in his office listening to passengers complaining outside. The engines were on strike and they refused to move. Gordon took the lead in complaining. The Fat Controller snapped back and then hopped in his car to find Edward, who agreed to do the shunting. That day, trains ran as usual, but the next morning he was in a terrible mood. The engines were treating him poorly. The Fat Controller made it very clear he was thankful for Edward's help, and then ran off to buy a tank engine immediately. He went to a workshop and saw all sorts of engines. He settled on a little green saddle tank and named him Percy. The Fat Controller had Edward teach Percy everything. The little engine learned quickly, and had no problem wheezing so loud it scared Henry enough to hide in the shed. Edward was very impressed. The next morning, Thomas arrived, and the Fat Controller came to speak with them. He'd shut the big engines up in the shed and told the 3 smaller ones they'd be running the whole railway. They all took very well to the work. Thomas and Edward ran the main line, and Percy ran the whole branch. Thomas was worried, but things would run smoothly. There were less trains, but passengers understood. The big engines now wished that they hadn't been so silly. Review time. The only piece of music worth mentioning here is Percy's theme, which makes its first appearance. It's got this bouncy, cheerful, naive feeling to it. I'd describe it as an infectious positivity, in its Season 1 form at least. There's a couple of neat visual things to mention too. Edward's working in Wellsworth Yard, which we don't see very often. And there's a little workshop scene, which includes some engines that totally aren't the main cast under Sheets. And, oh yeah, James's face went green after he was done cosplaying as a top. Pretty neat. As for story, it's unrealistic for sure. But this is a show about talking trains. Look, Thomas and Edward couldn't do the work of Gordon and Henry. You mix in James's and it's absolutely hopeless. The railway must have lost some business because of this, but also everything feels in place here. This is how every character would act, at least going off of what we know. Edward will do his best to do the most work he possibly can. Thomas doesn't mind a challenge, and he likes to take trains. Gordon, James, and Henry all have their different flavors of big-headed stupidity. Percy, being a cheerful, hard-working sort, is nice and bounces off of them well. He's happy to shunt or to run to the branch line. He just wants to work. The Fat Controller was smart here too. He made things work with the big engines, and when he finally had a chance to, he immediately punished them hard. They put him in a really bad spot, and he put them in an even worse one. I do like that Gordon and Henry missed Thomas and felt lonely without him. It's very wholesome to me. I'm gonna give this two-parter an 8 out of 10. Episode 17, Percy Runs Away. The big engines had been shut up for several days now and wished to work again. When the Fat Controller comes to see them, he tells them that the 3 smaller engines ran things well, but he would let them out if they agreed to behave. They all did, of course, and he let the smaller engines run off to play on branch lines as a reward for their hard work. Thomas went away at once to take Annie and Clarabelle for a run, and Edward and Percy played with trucks until the yard was tidy. Edward took some empty trucks to the quarry, which meant Percy was alone in the yard. He liked to watch trains go by and be cheeky to the big engines. After some shunting, Percy was waiting for the signalman to set his path for him, but he'd forgotten Edward's warning and didn't whistle for the signalman to let him know he was there. So, the signalman forgot. Percy looked down on the main line and saw Gordon running towards him at speed with the express. Gordon nearly ran into him, and before he knew it, Percy was running away backwards. He ran through Edward's station and up over Gordon's hill, down the other side and beyond. He lost his crew, and he was losing steam. A kind signalman noticed Percy running away through the station and sent him into a siding that ended in a big pile of dirt. Percy was saying to himself he wants to stop, and then he did. He ran into the dirt, but in truth he was too tired to care where he went. Workmen came right away to dig him out and consoled the little engine. "You'll have some coal and water and then you'll feel better." Then Gordon arrived. He was smiling and congratulated Percy on a good job running away, preventing a nasty accident, all while pulling Percy out of the dirt with this fancy winch thing. Percy is still cheeky, but he's much more careful on the main line. Review time. The runaway theme slowing down while Percy's losing steam is a great touch. On to the visuals. Gordon nearly flattening Percy was a genuinely scary moment to me when I was little, and it still carries a bit of weight now. It was shot very well. The scenes of Percy running through the main line remind you just how small he really is, after we've seen the big engines run the same paths for so long. He looks absolutely tiny climbing Gordon's hill. This story is simply fleshing out the new guy. Okay, so he's a hard worker, clearly. He's very cheeky, gotcha. And he is a bit forgetful, perhaps. Because it's not like something made him forget, like, he's not distracted like Thomas was. He's less mean than Thomas, though, and he doesn't mind the tedious work that Thomas wanted to escape so badly. As for the other characters, again, Edward gave advice and was once again forgotten. It's like he's trying to help everyone out, but they're too stupid to listen. We are reminded how much Thomas loves his coaches, of course, and his branch line, considering he ran off immediately the first chance he got. And most importantly to talk about here is Gordon. In the last couple of episodes, we saw just how much he despises what he considers tank engine work. He degraded Thomas for not being a tender engine. But here, he's so impressed with Percy that he congratulates him on running away. He's seeing tank engines as individuals now, and he likes this one, even if it can be annoying. Of course, he liked Thomas just as much, but I'm sure you get my point. 9 out of 10. A good showing from all characters involved, just not enough to call it perfect. Alright guys, if you've made it this far, I just want to say thanks for watching. I was worried I wouldn't be able to make something happen for today. I like these longer videos, but they'll have to be a little bit less frequent. Maybe every other week. In any case, I'll be talking about whatever change I make on the video that comes out on New Year's. I'll see you all in the next video, coming out on the 28th. Merry Christmas.